Hi, everyone. The open source project we decided to contribute to is called Hospital Run. Hospital Run is an initiative to provide a system to transfer hospitals in the developing world from paper based medical records to an offline first electronic system. It is being built with the intention of providing a modern health information system to the least resourced environments. The idea for Hospital Run began in 2012 at a Cure International Hospital in Kijabe, Kenya. Care Kenya primarily treats children with surgically correctable conditions, things like clubfoot, bowed legs, cleft lip and palate, and other conditions that are commonly addressed by public health initiatives in areas of the world with more resources, are the primary mission of Cure. In April 2012, Joe Worrell, a member of the hospital run team, was in Kenya to check out the effectiveness of a real time patient reporting platform Cure had just released, and he came across this. This was the medical record system for a hospital that had been providing life changing treatment to children throughout Kenya since 1998. Paper based records in low resource environments are not that surprising. However, there are plenty of commercial and open source projects that have tried unsuccessfully to truly solve the issue of moving health management away from paper record keeping to electronic systems. But when Joe Worrell saw this, he knew they had an even bigger problem to solve. These are doctors and clinicians at Cures Hospital in Kenya, loading medical record bins onto an ambulance that is headed out for a mobile clinic to provide specialized care. Seeing them digging through boxes of medical records, often losing valuable time and energy, trying to assign new patients to charts, asking patients to shuffle their medical records through the queues, and sometimes losing track of who had what data made them realize this is an offline problem. They knew that the right long term decision for any software solution was to go to the cloud, but this environment presented two big challenges that have dissuaded technology professionals from moving to a cloud solution for low resource parts of the world: unreliable infrastructure and disconnected environments. So they developed a paradigm for their system called offline first. The task we as a team chose to attempt to implement was a social work tab on the patient profile screen that deals with family information for the front end of Hospital Run. The motivation for this feature is that social determinants of health are important to capture as they help give the healthcare workers a better idea of factors that could potentially affect the patient's well being.
Throughout the attempt to create the social work tab, we encountered many different processes and tools used to coordinate among contributors. For the formal process of pull request approval, we had to undergo a JEST plus enzyme behavior-driven development test. These test suites would be written by us but ensure that the behavior of the tasks matches the behavior expected by the project. Additionally, the project maintainers had separate tests to ensure that our project was in alignment with the specifications of the task. We would also have to ensure that our code passes an ESLint for static program analysis test. After that process, in order for a pull request to be fully approved, the task had to undergo a code review of two project maintainers to ensure correctness, and that our code was adhering to the expectations of the project. We chose a task that dealt with the front end of the hospital run. We had to maintain the architecture of the system and not make any alternate suggestions to the architecture. The hospital run front end consisted of many different front end components, such as buttons, tabs, and web links, as well as two independent databases where the information of patients and appointments were stored. This provided a slight complication since we were dealing with two different types of database queries, and we had to ensure that we were not incorrectly querying or inserting data to the wrong database. Throughout the process of trying to communicate with the project maintainers, we found that it was difficult to communicate with them since we can only message them through the GitHub issues thread. We believe that the process of contributing to the open source software project could have been enhanced by alternative methods of communication such as Slack, Microsoft Teams, or any other messaging platform. This would allow contributors and maintainers to have a better communication regarding questions about documentation, architecture, and the goals of the task. Communication with the project maintainers was needed throughout this project since the documentation was lagging throughout the entirety of the project. The documentation page was practically empty, and thus we had no point of reference on the functionality of various important components for the project. Given almost no documentation about the components of the project, we spent a lot more time than needed on code archaeology rather than developing the code for the task. Furthermore, we had to look to past commits and past pull requests in order to figure out what we had to do to accomplish our task.
Overall, our experience interacting with the community of open source was interesting. We thought it was cool that to encourage collaboration from different developers, there is really no barrier to entry in order to start contributing. You can just state that you wish to contribute to an issue or task on GitHub issue forums, and a maintainer will assign it to you. In our case, we simply commented under the issue we were interested in, and our maintainer, Blessed, replied assigning us to the issue. I think we had a pretty good experience with this part because our maintainer was pretty prompt in assigning us and replying to our comments. I think this creates a really welcoming environment, but sometimes in open source this can also be a double-edged sword in the sense that maintainers do not really have control of the pace to which you contribute to the project besides simply like unassigning you from it. However, in the end, we still believe it's a mutually beneficial system, especially for us as students, because we get the experience of working on projects of various sizes, and the maintainers get people who are willing to offer their time and effort, like us, to bring a project to life. The relationship between project maintainers and contributors can cause slight friction on discussing the vision for a task. Within our project, we did not feel like it was that important to add the medical information of all of the family relatives, since those relatives may not have been patients of the hospital. However, the project maintainer noted that we should add a slight feature to the project that described whether or not the relative was a past patient of the hospital. Slight changes that occur in the iterative process of feature development are based on domain experience. In open source software contributions, since the entire world could potentially contribute to a project, the goals of the project have to be very rigid in order for the project to be successful. Since many individuals have not worked in a hospital, individuals without the domain expertise can cause conflicting user case stories and vision for the project. That's why it's important for maintainers to have clear communication with contributors regarding the goals of a task. This was an extremely interesting experience for me because I have a contrasting experience at my internship that I had last summer. There I worked on a very large project that also had a very large code base that happened to not be open source, and it was a different experience because there was a lot of documentation about the code that was there, the existing code, and I also had a very supportive developer community to reach out to all the time, i.e. my coworkers. And then we also had a vibrant messaging community because we used Microsoft Teams as well as email as well as other online websites to message each other and keep track of like the progress of our contributions, versus in this experience we didn't really have any documentation or community to rely on. I do think that there are open source projects that do have that support, but because of Hospitals Run's purpose, and since it might be not as well known, and since we want to keep offering it for free, I think that it is definitely lacking these areas, which I think is, understandable. Overall, I still think open source projects can be super successful and have really cool concepts to work on, and I can definitely see myself trying to contribute to one in the future.